Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, where we're diving into the world of tools that can really make coding a whole lot more efficient. As software development keeps getting more complex, all these libraries we got to manage and dependencies to handle, it can be a lot to keep up with. But don't worry, because there are a couple of fantastic tools out there that can really help us streamline things. And that's what we're going to be focusing on today. So we've got Poetry, which is a tool that really takes the headache out of managing those project dependencies in Python. And then we've got Clipinator, which is an AI coding assistant. Yeah. Powered by the very impressive GPT-4.
Yeah. You know what's really cool about Poetry is how it simplifies what can often be a really tedious process for developers. Instead of spending hours and hours tracking down all the libraries and the right versions you need, Poetry lets you just declare everything your project needs in one single file. It's called the pyproject.toml file. You can think of it kind of like a control panel for your project. You lay out the blueprint in this file, and Poetry takes care of actually bringing it all to life.
So it's like having time, like a personal assistant who gathers all the ingredients before you start cooking. So you have everything you need right there.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. So let's say, for instance, you're working on a project and you need the pendulum library for handling dates and times in Python. All you have to do is just add a line to your pyproject.toml file and specify pendulum and what version you need. And this is where it gets really smart. You can use these things called version constraints. So like you could say pendulum equals 2.1 and that little caret symbol.
Right.
Okay, so it tells Poetry, hey, I'm good with any version of pendulum that's 2.1 or higher, but less than 3.0. So you get the latest compatible version, but you're also avoiding any potential conflicts.
That's really neat. It sounds like such a time saver.
Yeah.
Especially for those larger projects that have a ton of dependencies. But what about those times when you need to make sure everyone working on the project is using the same versions of everything? To avoid those, it works on my machine headaches.
Poetry's got you covered there too. It generates this file called poetry.lock, and it basically acts as a snapshot of all your dependencies, and it locks them down to those specific versions. This is super important for what we call reproducible builds, because it makes sure that your code runs the same way, whether it's on your local machine or your colleague's computer or even in a production environment.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like a guarantee that everyone's on the same page, using the same ingredients, so to speak.
Hold on a sec. Isn't there a difference in how that lock file works when you're building like an application versus if you're building a library? You're absolutely right. That's actually one of Poetry's more powerful features. But it can also be a bit confusing sometimes. So when you're building an application, that poetry.lock file, it's treated as the ultimate truth. It ensures that every single dependency, even all those sub-dependencies, are pinned to a very specific version. And this guarantees consistency across all the different environments. But when you're building a library, Poetry handles that lock file a little bit differently. It still locks down those direct dependencies, the ones that you specifically listed in your pyproject.toml file, but it allows for some flexibility in the subdependencies of those libraries.
So why is there that difference?
Well, think about it this way. When someone's using your library, they might already have some of those subdependencies installed, but maybe at different versions. And if Poetry were to rigidly lock down all the subdependencies as well, it could lead to all these conflicts and compatibility issues. So this more flexible approach for libraries allows them to play nicely with other packages in a larger project. So it's all about finding that right balance between consistency and compatibility.
That's a really clever way to handle that.
Yeah.
I could see how that would prevent a lot of headaches for those developers who are using the library. But before we move on from Poetry, I am curious about how it interacts with virtual environments.
Oh, this is where things get even more streamlined. Because Poetry actually creates and manages its own virtual environments for your projects, so everything stays nice and organized.
Okay, so for those who might not be familiar with virtual environments,
Sure.
Can you explain what a virtual environment is and why they are so important?
Absolutely. Imagine you're working on multiple Python projects, and each one requires different sets of libraries, and maybe even conflicting versions of those libraries. Virtual environments, they basically create these isolated sandboxes for each of your projects,
Right.
and that makes sure that their dependencies don't clash with each other. Or with your global Python installation, it's like having separate workspaces for each project, which keeps everything nice and tidy and organized. And the best part is, Poetry takes care of setting up and managing these virtual environments automatically.
So you don't have to manually create and activate them every time you switch projects.
Yep.
That's a huge time saver.
Exactly. And to work inside that Poetry managed virtual environment, you can use commands like poetry run. to
Yeah.
execute your code, or tools like PyTest if you're doing testing. And you don't have to worry about activating the environment manually. And if you want to drop into a shell session within that virtual environment, you can use Poetry Shell.
So Poetry is handling all that behind-the-scenes work.
Yeah.
I can just focus on the coding itself. That's fantastic. But what if I need to update my project's dependencies down the line? Like if there are newer versions available, do I have to do that manually?
Not at all. Poetry has this really handy command. It's called Poetry Update, and it checks for any updates to all the packages that are listed in your pyproject.tomarol file. And remember those version constraints we talked about earlier? Well, it respects those.
Yeah.
So you'll always get the latest compatible versions. And then it updates your poetry.log file accordingly, which keeps everyone working on the project in sync.
It sounds like Poetry really takes all the pain out of dependency management. Makes it so easy to set up and manage and update those project dependencies. Throughout that entire development lifecycle, I'm impressed already. Now I'm really curious to learn about this AI coding buddy that you mentioned earlier, Clipinator. What makes it so special?
Well, you can think of Clipinator as this AI apprentice that actually learns from you and collaborates with you as you write code. And it uses the power of GPT-4, which means it can do way more than just write code. It can actually help you plan and debug and test, and even think through the architecture of your projects.
Wow, that's a pretty big claim. I gotta admit, I am a little bit skeptical. How can AI truly collaborate with a human developer?
It's all about striking that right balance between automation and human control. You see, Clipinator isn't designed to replace developers. Instead, it acts as this really powerful assistant. It augments our capabilities, and it really boosts our productivity. And at the heart of Clipinator is this thing called the Taskmaster agent. And it kind of acts like the project manager. It guides that overall development process.
So just like calling the shots, like, okay, team, here's what we're building, let's get to work.
You got it. The Taskmaster starts by asking you some questions, just to get a sense of your project's goals and requirements. Then it breaks down the project into smaller, more manageable tasks, and it delegates those tasks to specialized subagents, which Clipinator calls minions.
Minions, that's a fun way to
Yeah.
put it. I'm picturing a whole army of little AI helpers scurrying around, each with their own unique skill set.
Yeah, that's a pretty accurate picture.
Right.
Each minion has its own specialized role and its own set of tools. So for example, there's the architect minion, and it focuses on designing that overall project structure and creating the file structure, laying the foundation of your project, making sure it's well organized and easy to navigate.
So it's like having a virtual architect, sketching out the blueprints before the builders even start laying bricks.
Exactly. And then you have the writer minion, which handles the actual code generation. But don't think of it as just spitting out some generic code. Clipinator's agents, they're trained on these massive data sets of high-quality code, so they understand all those best practices and coding conventions and even different programming styles.
So it's not just churning out basic boilerplate code. It's actually writing code that's well-structured and readable and tailored to the project's specific needs.
That's right. And the writer minion doesn't work alone. It collaborates with other minions, like the editor minion, which refines the code that was generated and makes sure it adheres to style guidelines and those best practices. And there's even a QA minion that runs tests and helps identify any potential bugs. It's like having this whole team of AI developers working alongside you, each specializing in a particular aspect of software development.
This is blowing my mind. But hold on a sec. How does Clipinator actually understand what needs to be done? Does it, like, read your mind? Or is there some way that you tell it what you want?
Well, Clipinator uses a few key inputs to grasp your project and work effectively. One really important element is the project architecture, which is essentially a text-based outline of the project's structure and a summary of what each file is supposed to do. And this is generated by the architect minion, and it acts as a roadmap for all the other minions. It guides their actions.
So it's like giving Clipinator the blueprints, saying, here's the overall plan, now go forth and build. But what about the actual code itself? How does Clipinator understand the existing code base?
Well, Clipinator analyzes the project structure using tools like Stags, which creates this index of all the symbols in your code base. And this allows Clipinator to understand how different parts of the code are connected and identify potential areas for improvement or expansion. So it's like giving Clipinator this detailed map of your project's code. And that allows it to navigate and understand the relationships between different files and functions.
That's really clever. It sounds like Clipinator is constantly learning and adapting to the project as it evolves. But what about other aspects of software development, like code quality and integration with existing workflows?
Well, Clipinator is designed to integrate seamlessly into your existing development workflow. For instance, it can analyze the output of linters, which are tools that check your code for style and potential errors. And by understanding that linting output, Clipinator can actually identify and even fix code quality issues before they become major problems. It also integrates with continuous integration systems. Those are the automated processes that build and test your code every time you make changes.
Hold on a sec. For those who might not be familiar with continuous integration or CI, can you explain briefly what it is and why it's important?
Oh, yeah, sure. Continuous integration is like having a dedicated team of testers who automatically check your code for errors and make sure that it integrates smoothly with the main code base every single time you make a change. This helps catch problems early on and prevents them from snowballing into bigger issues later in the development process. And Clipinator uses CI to ensure that the code it generates fits perfectly into your existing project and doesn't break anything.
Okay, that's a huge relief. I definitely wouldn't want an AI assistant introducing bugs or breaking my builds. But I am curious about something. We've talked about how Clipinator understands the project and writes code, but does it actually remember things from previous interactions?
Yes, it does. Clipinator has this memory feature where it can store information about your project, your preferences, and even your coding habits so it becomes more personalized and efficient over time.
Wait, so Clipinator remembers my coding habits. That's pretty impressive. And maybe a little creepy too. So does that mean it gets better at anticipating my needs the more I use it?
Exactly. It's like having a coding partner who learns your style and anticipates your next move. This personalized approach can really speed up development and make the whole coding process feel more intuitive and collaborative. Speaking of collaboration, I'm sure you're wondering how much control you actually have as a developer when you're working with Clipinator.
Yeah, that's a good point. As much as I like the idea of having an AI assistant,
Ah,
I wouldn't want to feel like I'm just a passenger in the coding process. So
yeah.
do I have any say in what Clipinator does?
Absolutely. You're always in control. You can interact with the taskmaster using simple commands if you're not happy with the direction things are going. You can interrupt the process and give it feedback. You can even manually edit the project architecture if you want to steer Clipinator's approach in a specific direction. It's all about finding that balance between automation and human guidance.
Okay, that makes me feel a lot better. It sounds like Clipinator is this powerful tool that can really enhance a developer's workflow without taking away their creative control. This has been super insightful. We've gone from the practicalities of managing dependencies with poetry to the mind-blowing potential of AI-powered coding with Clipinator. Both tools offer such exciting possibilities for streamlining software development. Now, I think it's time to shift gears a little bit and delve a bit deeper into Clipinator's toolbox. What kinds of tools does it actually use to interact with the code and the development environment?
Well, Clipinator has this really impressive arsenal of tools, and we'll explore all of those in detail right after a quick break. Welcome back. Before the break, we were talking about all the cool tools Clipinator has at its disposal.
All right, I'm ready to hear more. We were talking about the architect and writer minions, but what about the actual tools they use to get things done? How do they actually interact with the code and the environment?
Well, Clipinator has file tools like write file and read file, just like their names suggest. They let Clipinator create new files, modify existing ones, and read content from files just like any human developer would.
So it's not just generating code in a vacuum. It can actually work with the files in the project.
Exactly. And then it also has terminal tools like Run Bash and Python, which let Clipinator run commands directly in the terminal. It's basically like having Clipinator type those commands in for you, but way faster and more accurate, of course.
Hold on. So it can run Bash scripts, Python scripts, and really interact with the terminal just like I would.
Yep, that's right. There's even a tool called Bash Background for running those longer processes in the background. Like if you need to start up a development server or something, that way it can multitask and handle those longer processes without blocking other tasks.
So Clipinator can juggle multiple tasks, run scripts, work with the file system. It's starting to feel like it can do almost anything I can do in a terminal.
Pretty much. And it doesn't stop there. Remember how we were talking about Clipinator being able to get data from websites and APIs?
Right, I was wondering about that. So if I need to get data from an external API for my project, Clipinator can handle that too.
Absolutely. It can make those API calls, get the data, and even parse the results, all as part of the tasks it's working on.
This is incredible. It's like having this superpowered developer working with me, taking care of all those tedious tasks that I usually have to do manually.
And speaking of automation, Clipinator can also automate browser interactions. using Selenium.
Wait, Selenium, isn't that mainly used for testing web applications?
That's right. Clipinator can actually use Selenium to open up a web browser, navigate to specific pages, click buttons, fill out forms, even check the browser console for errors.
Wow, so not only can it write the code, but it can also test the code in a real browser? That's pretty amazing.
Exactly. Just imagine it automatically testing your web app in different browsers, making sure everything's compatible and catching those visual bugs before they reach your users.
That would be a total game changer for web development. And I'm guessing this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what Clipinator can do, right?
You're absolutely right. Clipinator's toolset is constantly expanding, especially as all these new tools and technologies are coming out. And the best part is, developers can actually create their own custom tools, too.
Wow, so it's not just a closed system. It can actually evolve and adapt to the ever-changing world of software development.
Exactly. That open and extensible nature is really what makes Clipinator so powerful and versatile. But with all this talk about AI doing all these coding tasks, it makes you wonder, what happens to the humans? If AI can do all this, will we even need developers in the future?
That's the question that's on everyone's mind these days. It's a valid concern for sure, but I don't think AI is about replacing developers completely. I see it more as a powerful tool that can help us, augment and enhance our own capabilities.
I agree. AI, like what we see with Clipinator, can really take care of those repetitive tasks. That frees up developers to focus on the more creative and strategic parts of software development, like coming up with innovative solutions, improving the user experience, and just writing better code overall.
It's like having an AI assistant who handles all the grunt work, so we can focus on the big picture.
Exactly. It's kind of like how calculators didn't replace mathematicians. They actually empowered them to tackle more complex problems. I think it's the same with AI coding assistants. They won't replace us, but they'll help us push the boundaries of what's possible in software development.
I like that analogy. So it's not about humans versus machines. It's about humans and machines working together to create something really amazing.
Exactly. That's what makes this whole era of software development so exciting. But while we embrace this incredible potential of AI, we also need to talk about how we actually integrate these tools into real-world development workflows. So let's shift our focus a bit to how developers can actually use Clipinator in their day-to-day work.
That sounds like a perfect place to pick up after a quick break. All right, let's get practical. We've talked a lot about Clipinator, from the AI behind it to all those cool tools it has. But I think our listeners are probably wondering, how would I actually use this thing?
Right. It's all very impressive in theory, but how does Clipinator fit into a real developer's workflow?
Exactly. So let's say I'm a developer, I'm working on a new web app. Where does Clipinator come in?
Okay, imagine this. You're starting a brand new project, you've got your idea, you know what you want to build, and now it's time to actually start coding. This is where Clipinator can be super helpful.
Okay, so I open up Clipinator. What happens next?
Well, the Taskmaster agent will start by asking you a few questions about your project. Like what's the purpose of the app, who's it for, what are the key features, and what technologies are you thinking of using?
So it's like Clipinator wants to have a little brainstorming session with me.
Exactly. It wants to get a sense of your goals and the overall scope of the project. Then, based on what you tell it, it'll suggest a possible project structure, like what components you might need and how the files should be organized.
So it's helping me plan out the project from the start. That would be super helpful,
Yeah.
especially for bigger projects.
And this is where those minions we talked about come in. The architect minion will take the lead, using your input and its knowledge of best practices to create a solid foundation for your project.
So like a virtual architect drawing up the blueprints.
Exactly. Then, as you start writing code, the writer minion jumps in. It will offer suggestions, generate code snippets, and it can even write entire functions for you based on your instructions.
Well, it can write entire functions.
Mhm.
That sounds almost too good to be true. What if I need to connect to a database or make an API call? Can I handle that?
Absolutely. Remember all those tools we talked about. Read file, write file, run bash, Python, HTTP GET, even Selenium. Clipinator can use all of those to do all sorts of things, from working with files to interacting with databases, making API calls, and even automating stuff in a web browser.
Wow, so it's not just writing simple code. It can actually do some pretty complex stuff.
Right. And the whole time, you're in control. If Clipinator suggests something you don't like, you can just say no and give it some feedback. You can even go in and edit the code it generates to make it exactly how you want it.
That's good to hear. I was a little worried about giving up control over my code, but it sounds like Clipinator is more like a partner. helping me work faster and better.
Exactly. And as you keep working, Clipinator is learning from you. It remembers your coding style, what you like and don't like, and even the specific patterns you use in your code. So it gets smarter and more helpful over time.
That's pretty amazing. It's like having a coding buddy who's always there to help out and offer suggestions.
That's a great way to put it. And the really cool thing is that Clipinator can be useful for developers at all levels. Beginners can use it as a guide to learn best practices and avoid mistakes. And experienced developers can use it to automate those boring, repetitive tasks so they can focus on the more challenging and creative stuff.
So it's like having an extra pair of hands. No matter how much experience you have, I can definitely see how this could change the way we develop software.
It absolutely could. And I think this is just the beginning. As AI keeps getting better, we're going to see even more powerful coding assistants that can handle even more complex tasks and provide even more support.
It's an exciting time to be a developer. We're on the verge of a whole new era in software development, one where AI helps us create truly amazing things with code. And tools like Poetry and Clipinator are leading the way, making coding more accessible, more efficient, and, yeah, maybe even a little bit fun.
I totally agree. And to everyone listening, we encourage you to check out these tools and see how they can fit into your own workflows. You might just discover a whole new way of coding that you never thought possible.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you learned something new and exciting, and we look forward to diving into more cool topics with you in the future. Until then, happy coding.